You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the grow your own food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Whitney Cohen of Life Lab to talk about her experience with garden-based education. Whitney is a teacher, trainer, and author with a tremendous commitment and expertise in inquiry and place-based education, strategies for engaging diverse learners, school gardens, and the intersection between environmental education and public schools. She is the education director of Life Lab and a lecturer at UC Santa Cruz. Welcome to the show today, Whitney.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Absolutely. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
I'd be happy to. Let's see. This started for me really probably right out of college when I became an outdoor educator at a residential outdoor science school. And at that time, I knew that I loved being outside. I loved nature, and I wanted to have a job working outdoors and with kids. And so I came to this place out in California called San Mateo Outdoor Education, where we taught kids out in the redwoods. And I would take 5th and 6th graders on hikes and then out to the tide pools, and they would stay for a week, for 5 days. And
oh man, how come that wasn't available when I was a kid?
It's a pretty amazing thing that we have going here in California. I did it when I was in 5th grade too. It's pretty typical in 5th and 6th grades here in California. And so I was a teacher there for 2 years. I went by a nature name. I went by Cricket for those 2 years. And it was a really transformative experience for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just incredible because I knew I loved, the natural world. And what I discovered there is how much I loved sharing that with children. And so from there, what I realized is my least favorite part of working there was Fridays. It was so hard for me to say goodbye to my group every Friday. And then on Monday we'd start with a new group. And I realized I really wanted to have my class, a group of kids that I would work for 1 or more years and have them in a community, So then I decided I wanted to become a teacher, which I'd never even taken an education class in undergrad. That was not the path I was on.
So Whitney, how old were you when you were teaching in the redwoods?
Let's see, that was, I turned 21 out there. So 21, 22, and 23. Oh,
wow. Really formidable years.
Yes, exactly. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Especially for me, because I met my husband there, and my current husband.
Nice.
And many of my closest friends are from that time. Yeah. And so then I went back to school to get a degree to become a teacher. Mm-hmm. And then while this is kind of an amazing connection with Life Lab, while I was in school to become a teacher to get my credential and my master's in education, I had just one class in teaching science. And that class was taught by a lecturer from outside the university that year, and that was Robbie Jaffe, who was the founder of Life Lab. And so
wow.
Robbie really shared with us, it was just an overview of all science education.
Yeah.
So she shared with us the typical things that you see in classrooms like FOSS science or different, science kits, science textbooks, etc. But she also really emphasized garden-based science and hands-on outdoor science education that you can do in schools through a school garden, because that's what she had founded in this organization, Life Lab. And so I just, of course, coming right out of the outdoor education world, this just kind of lit a fire under me.
I'll bet.
I was so excited by that. And so right out of that school, right out of there, I became a middle school science teacher at Pescadero Middle School. And that's a very small, rural, very low-income school here on the central coast of California. And that's where that dream came true, where I got my kids actually not just for 1 year, but for 3 years, because it's such a small school. I was the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science teacher for the middle school. I was the only science teacher for the middle school.
Wow.
And so there I started a school garden because I wanted to bring my kids outdoors regularly and have an outdoor classroom where we could do earth and life science right there with earth and with life. And we had a great time out there together, and I spent 5 years at that school.
Wow.
And then in 2007...
Last day it broke your heart.
The last day did break my heart. You're right about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a really important place for me. Yeah. And I'm actually still in touch with a lot of my past students and colleagues from there. And
nice.
And then in 2007, my best friend was working here at UC Santa Cruz on the campus farm, which has been there for 40 plus years. And
oh my gosh,
I loved where she worked. I would walk up to meet her at the farm, and I remember walking the path to the farm and thinking, one day I'm going to work somewhere this beautiful.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I was actually leading a teacher workshop about something totally different, about supporting English language learners. But I was at a big conference, and Life Lab was also at the conference as kind of a school garden support organization.
Right.
And I connected there with Robbie and Gail, who had taught that class with her, and I let them know, I took your class when I was in my master's program. I was really inspired, and I became a teacher, and I used a school garden, and I've just loved implementing everything you taught me. And they basically said, I'm so glad we're meeting you because we have this job opening. Our education director of 17 years is retiring.
Oh my gosh.
We're looking to fill that spot. And and I remember I called my husband from that conference. I didn't even wait till I got home. I called him on my lunch break and was like, what if we do this? What if I take this job? And so then in 2007, I joined up with Life Lab, and I've been in education there ever since.
So I actually just remembered, I came into your office about a month ago.
Yeah, that's how this all came to be, that I got to be on this podcast with you. That's right. Okay, good.
I didn't connect Life Lab with the farm at Santa Cruz until you said that. So
yeah,
and you have an extraordinary place there.
We do, and I can explain that a little bit. So Life Lab is an independent nonprofit organization, and our focus is garden-based learning. So we have field trips for kids during the school year for kids right here in Santa Cruz County. We've got field trips on the school days. We've got summer camps on the summer days, and then we support our local school gardens. We also do a lot of work nationally. We do trainings for educators who want to use gardens for learning. And so we do a lot of school garden workshops, and we publish curriculum to share activities and lesson plans with teachers and other educators who want to bring learning to life in the gardens. We're located on the UCSC farm, which is tremendously lucky and very rare that an independent nonprofit is located. We actually rent space on the UC Santa Cruz campus. So I think a lot of people come away and think, oh, that's a program of UCSC. We're actually not.
Got it.
We're our own nonprofit, but we have a really beautiful and fruitful partnership with UCSC because they allow us to bring the kids up and to see not only our garden space, but the big, beautiful farm that is open to the public and that anyone who ever comes to Santa Cruz should come visit. And in exchange, we support them and their apprentices with things like classes on teaching and on public speaking and on garden-based education. And so we share resources really, really well, and we feel really lucky to be up there.
Wow, yes. Yeah, so paint a picture for us of the space.
Yeah, well, overall farm is more than 20 acres. I don't even remember exactly. It's about 25 acres, but there's, many, many varieties of apple trees, which are on my mind right now because it's fall and we're enjoying some amazing apples right now.
Yeah.
And then there's the down garden, which is hand cultivated. Then there's the field, which is tractor cultivated. And basically it's a big, beautiful farm where apprentices come and they learn about agroecology and sustainable food systems. That's the UCSC farm. And then on the bottom, kind of 1 1/4 acre of that farm, Life Lab has what we call the garden classroom. And the garden classroom is where we run our programs for our local kids, for Santa Cruz County kids. And so for our field trips and our summer camps all happen there. And so that's a garden space that's really designed for children. Well, it's two audiences. It's for children and then also as a demonstration site for educators. And so we've got kind of the centerpiece is we've got a zoo bed, which is this kind of spiral bed that's filled in with plants that all have animal names.
Oh, nice.
So like kangaroo paw and bird of paradise and hens and chicks, all these.
Yes.
They have little labels, and that's the zoo bed with all the animals. And then we've got an observational beehive where the kids can actually open the door and see the bees behind plastic. And we've got, of course, a worm bin, and right in the center, actually, next to the zoo bed, we've got a whole rot zone. So we have demonstration compost bins and worm bins. We've got chickens, which are every kid's favorite part, I think.
Oh my gosh, yes. Did you say a rot?
We call it the rot zone.
ROT.
Yes.
Nice.
And that's where, a lot of school gardens and home gardens will put our compost kind of in the far corner, which makes sense. Sometimes it smells and it's not necessarily beautiful, but we very intentionally put that right in the heart of our garden because so much of what we want to teach about is nutrient cycling and ecological principles, et cetera. And so we've got this kind of big focus on decomposition right in the heart of our garden. There's so much more I could tell you about our site. I don't know how much detail you want, but some of the kids' favorite parts are we've got a tunnel that kids can go in that's just grown over with passion vine and thumbergia flowers and trumpet vine. And kids love that. I think kids love to have like a little hidey hole or secret spot that they can. We have we call it the bird's nest, but it's big enough that kids can sit inside it. That's all woven together that kids really love. We've got a tree of tunes, which is a big old avocado tree where we put a bunch of musical instruments under the tree and kids can go in there and make music.
Wow.
And we've got a whole lot more. And actually on our website, there's a beautiful slideshows of all the different things that we have in the garden.
Nice. What's your website?
Oh, it's lifelab.org, LIFELAB.org.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. You mentioned a term that I want you to kind of take it apart a little bit. Nutrient cycling. What is it and why is it so important?
Yeah, well, we just really like, I'll say it kind of how we would say it to kids. We love for kids to understand that we can take things right off of our farm and right off of our plates, like our plant-based food waste and any greens or browns that we're pulling out when we're weeding beds and clearing areas. And we can actually keep those on our farm, and then by adding them to our compost, we can grab those nutrients and then keep them on our farm and then feed those nutrients back to our new baby plants. And so we love to have kids, let's say we eat a snack together, then we always have them add any food waste they have that came from plants. They add it to the compost pile. And then what I love to do, and we like to do a lot, is go to the finished compost, which is also right there in the rot zone, and have each kid take a little scoopful and find a plant out in the garden that looks like it needs a little love, and they can put it right at the base of that plant, and then we have them breathe on the plant, give it a little carbon dioxide, and they say, "Thank you, green plant," and they kind of blow on the plant.
Nice.
And so we like to teach them about that, how we can actually take those nutrients from what looks like garbage or waste to most kids, and then actually use it to feed our plants.
One of the things I love about this is you're making there's a whole circle here. You're showing them the whole cycle.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I've often said, I think there's a real difference between knowing about something and knowing something.
Yeah.
And I think that a kid can know about, a nutrient cycle or any of these cycles, the water cycle. But when they actually have their snack and then they put their apple core into the compost pile and then they look in there a month later and they see this, decomposing apple core, and then a few months later in this absolutely beautiful finished compost, and then they go feed the roots of the apple tree with that compost. They know the nutrient cycle, and they know that they can contribute to a really to ecological balance and to to kind of an environmental solution.
And there was a space uphill from your offices where I saw a sign on some trees, some apple trees, and it says, "Please do not pick these. These are for the kids."
Yep.
So they're actually, which was great, they're actually picking an apple off of a tree.
Oh, yeah. Those signs are up right now because our site is open to the public. And so, on occasion, an adult will come through with a bag, and I can understand why. Here it is, a beautiful apple tree, and it's like, oh, no one's harvesting these. And but we actually are saving those because as soon as kids come back to school, so that, school just started.
Yep.
And so next week, they'll start coming up for field trips, and they pick the apples. They press apple cider. We often do comparative taste tests.
Nice.
We do all sorts of stuff. They pick corn. They pick and eat corn, and then they pick flour corn. We have dried flour corn, and they grind it to make flour, and then they press tortillas, and they shake cream to make butter, and they actually harvest and taste all sorts of things. One thing we love to pick with them is we make 6 plant part burritos. So each kid will pick a big lettuce leaf, or it can even be a big spinach leaf, and then we go around the garden, we gather all 6 plant parts. So we get a root, like a beet or a carrot, and we get a stem and a leaf and a flower. And so anyway, and we wash and chop and tear these things all together, and everyone kind of puts a little bit of grated beet in their lettuce leaf and a little broccoli floret. Anyway, they get all 6 plant parts, and they wrap the leaf around it, and then they just gobble it up.
Yeah.
And
so I have to tell you something. As you shared about that, James, my podcast editor here, his reaction was epic. It was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, that's how the kids react too. And I have to tell you that before I really got into gardening with kids, I did not quite believe that myself. I didn't really like vegetables growing up as a kid, and I was one of those adults who thought, kids don't like vegetables, kind of get over it. And it's absolutely false. It's amazing to see on the garden when they harvest these things and they're part of preparing them.
Oh yeah.
Then when they eat it, it's like, oh, where did you get these? Where can I get more of these? And what is this called? And they love it. And we take kids off the hook. We tell them, you don't have to finish everything. We hope you'll try everything, but you don't have to finish it. And if you don't like it, you're even welcome to just, give it back to the farm, spit it into the compost pile.
Put it in the compost pile, yeah.
But once they know they're off the hook in that way, they try things, and then they go, wait, these cherry tomatoes are amazing. This is like candy, and they love it. They eat those 6 plant part wraps every time. They gobble them down. There's no dressing or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because we're counting on the flavor of the plants.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we're counting on the flavor of the plants and the positive association, giving them a really positive experience where that feels like a treat.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Yeah. Okay.
I want you to think about that one student that you could tell just by the interaction, it changed their life.
Yeah.
You got one?
Yeah, I got one.
Tell us, please.
We had a student up at Life Lab who was there for a field trip. And when he was actually in my colleague John's group, but I got to witness this when we went around, in each group, they just arrived. And so each student was saying their names. And when it got to this student's turn, he didn't say anything. And then the girl right next to him said, oh, his name's Marco. He just came here from El Salvador, and he hasn't spoken in school since he got here. He's been here 2 weeks, and he hasn't said a word. And, we saw that he had an aide with him, an instructional aide, and she nodded her head. That's right, that he's not speaking. And he knows how to speak. He speaks fluent Spanish, but he hasn't yet spoken. And so no problem, we continued, thanks, Marco. And we continued around the circle and then went out onto the farm and for our, experiential field trip. And at one point we were in the strawberry field and each kid got to bend down and look at the strawberries, and then each one found a red one and picked one. And John crouched down right next to Marco, and he picked a strawberry, and he held it up, and he said, fresa, which is Spanish for strawberry.
Yep.
And Marco looked back at him and said, fresa. And John, smiled at him, and he continued to ask him, in Spanish, like, do you like strawberries? And anyway, and Marco started a conversation with him about the strawberries. And at that moment, we looked up above Marco's head, and his aide had tears coming down her cheeks. And that was the first time she had heard his voice. And we realized this place and this, hands-on experience is opening him up. And he, for the first time yet since he arrived in America, he feels safe and comfortable enough to participate verbally. And that's a moment I'll never forget.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I got tears. And that's why I do what I do, is because that's the kind of difference that it makes for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Absolutely. So your gardens there, how do they fit into the current school and educational landscape? Let's kind of start talking about how we get this from, your Life Lab dirt rot space to the classroom.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. We found a variety of, I would call them on-ramps for schools based on where their priorities are. One key kind of on-ramp is science education. And right now, I'll try to keep this simple, but there's a lot happening in public education right now. And one of the big changes happening is they're rolling out new content standards, which means what the content teachers are required to teach is shifting. And in science, those new standards that have been adopted here in California and in many states, but not all states across the nation, are called next generation science standards. And there's an exceptionally strong fit between the next generation science standards and garden-based learning, because next generation science standards focus on students learning science by being scientists. So,
nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. So they have these science and engineering practices, which are like the verbs of science. So things like asking questions and analyzing and interpreting data, and communicating your results, that kind of thing. That's actually part of the curriculum. And the idea is that everything you learn, you should learn it but through engaging in the practices. And that philosophy exactly mirrors the philosophy of Life Lab. It's actually why Life Lab is called Life Lab, because we see these gardens as living laboratories, and the students are the scientists. And so in a garden, if you want to take a next generation science approach to earth and life science, you need real earth and real life. And then you have that place where students can go out and actually investigate things, become curious, ask questions, design experiments, build models of things. And so there's just this incredible overlay with what's happening in science education right now.
Wow.
On top of that, and it sometimes feels separate, but I see this as all really integrated, many schools are really now directly trying to address the obesity epidemic. And so there's a focus on nutrition education. And of course, the garden, as we just talked about, is a great place to get kids excited about healthy foods, and particularly fruits and vegetables. And so that's another on-ramp that we can take. If schools really want to get their kids jazzed about healthy eating, let's say that in their cafeterias, they're shifting to a healthier, to salad bars and healthy offerings, and then their kids aren't eating that food, which is pretty typical that they say, we put out the salad bar, but the kids aren't eating it. Then again, garden-based education is a great way to get kids jazzed about the foods that are showing up on their salad bars. And there's research behind all of this. There's great, peer-reviewed articles showing that kids who garden actually eat better food. They eat more fruits and vegetables. So that's another great on-ramp. And a third, really kind of less tangible on-ramp, but I think equally important, is social-emotional learning.
I'm sorry, is what?
Social-emotional learning.
Oh, all right.
There's a real movement now in schools to focus not only on academic learning, but also on social and emotional learning and personal development. And the garden is such a great place for that, for kids to learn about cooperation and working together and to feel a sense of accomplishment because they've nurtured something. And I mean, you should see a kid I'm sure you probably have, when they've planted their little bean seed and they've watered it, and then when that little bean seed pops through the soil, my bean is being born, and they'll get protective of it and they'll be proud of it. And all of those are critical life skills that we can foster in a school setting by involving kids in gardening.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So what are some of the key challenges to implementing these garden-based learnings in school?
I think the key challenge is that gardens take a tremendous amount of time and effort. Yeah. And you will never walk onto a school campus and gather the paid staff at that campus and say, who has a bunch of spare time here?
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to see a lot of hands. I mean, teachers are so overworked, and I can speak firsthand on this.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable the amount of work that a teacher is expected to do on any given day. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for administrators and parent volunteers, of course, are great, but they're of course moving with their kids through the system, and so they graduate. And so I think that one key challenge in all of this is just providing the kind of infrastructure support so that it can happen. It really takes a champion and or a team, and it's not always clear who that person would be.
Right.
Or those people would be. And on top of that, it takes this tremendous variety of the skill set is pretty wide and mm-hmm. wild for a garden-based educator, because if you're going to be a garden teacher, you've got to have your horticulture, pretty well down so you can grow this thing. You probably want to have some good construction skills because you're going to be doing the fence and the irrigation and blah, blah, blah. But then, of course, you also need to be an educator and a teacher and know how to manage a group of 30, 6-year-olds or et cetera. And those are, and then tie to the content standards and to the curriculum. And
wow.
So I think that's the key challenge is funding or finding other ways to hold great people in these positions when that position, it's not like classroom teacher or principal, just something that every school knows they have and they have a budget for it. And so that's, I would say, a key challenge.
Yeah. I wonder, what if, I'm a what if kind of guy, what if every school had their own garden coordinator? That was their full-time job.
Yeah, I mean, it would be incredible.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to take into account is just the context. The schools, at least in our area, and I know this is typical across the country, they don't have much of anything anymore. Yeah. Like when I went to school, I was in a public school, but we had a librarian and a nurse, an art teacher. They don't have any of that. I know a lot of schools here this year in our county, they had to choose between a PE teacher or a science teacher. They don't get both. And so there's so much that's currently on the cutting room floor.
This is me shaking my head in disgust.
Yeah. No, it's terrifying.
Wow.
But it's what's happening with slashed school budgets, et cetera.
Yeah.
So there are, and I think you and I are going to get into it, but there are some solutions to this, and there are some great models of getting garden coordinators into schools. But right now it's kind of choose your own adventure. There's not one clear model that this is how you do it. Everyone's kind of figuring it out for themselves.
So school garden support organization, is that kind of what you're pointing at there?
Yeah, so that's one really exciting kind of trend that we're seeing nationally is a lot of regions across the country now have school garden support organizations. These are organizations, they're often nonprofits, but that's not necessarily true. That's not true of all of them. Some are government organizations, public health organizations, et cetera, but many are nonprofit organizations. Oh, and I guess some are through universities, but these are organizations that support multiple school gardens across their region. So there's things like Real School Gardens in Fort Worth, Texas, and they're also in various regions across the country, or Community Groundworks in Madison, Wisconsin, or City Sprouts in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Each of these are organizations that are supporting a lot of school gardens across their region. And they're fundraising, they're supporting with supplies, they're supporting with professional development for teachers and educators, and many are also supporting school gardens by providing garden educators. Sometimes they're AmeriCorps service members. There's actually a branch of AmeriCorps now called Food Corps.
Oh, really?
Which is it's over 200 Food Corps service members, which are a kind of AmeriCorps service member, who are serving in schools to promote healthy food in schools. And so some of these support organizations are placing Food Corps or other AmeriCorps service members in schools. Some are paying stipends to teachers for the extra work they're doing to be a garden coordinator. Some are paying garden coordinators or paying, other types of entities or individuals on contract to actually coordinate and teach in these school gardens. So the school garden support organizations are one really, really exciting trend I'm seeing, because all of a sudden it becomes feasible and possible and not daunting to any school in that region. It's like, oh, we can have a school garden because we have a lot of support coming in. It doesn't mean anymore that our homeroom teacher is going to have to stay until 7 o'clock at night fixing the irrigation.
Fixing the garden, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. Any other ideas or things that you see coming down the road on that?
Yeah, I think the key task at this point is kind of documenting and sharing the models that are out there. We've seen a lot of interesting models. Like there's some schools here on the central coast of California where they pay for a substitute to come in 1 day a week, and then that releases this teacher, the classroom teacher, to be the garden coordinator.
Nice.
So that just 1 day a week, this woman becomes a garden coordinator and she takes out every class, kinder through fifth. And so, there's that model. There's the service member model. There's another organization here called the Living Classroom that's here in our area that has a big group of docents, and they have a paid coordinator for the docents. They train the docent on this lesson, and then the docents, kind of fan out to all of the schools and train, and then teach the lesson to all the kids. And then they gather back the next week, get trained on a new lesson, and then fan out and share it with the kids. So there are a lot of different models, and I think what's missing is kind of a really cohesive national conversation where everybody gets to learn from each other and say, oh, that's how you're doing it. In a couple of, actually in Berkeley Unified and Washington, D.C., and possibly other areas, I'm not sure, but definitely those two areas, they've passed a soda tax. And the soda tax was to fund a Healthy Schools initiative. And part of that Healthy Schools initiative was money for garden coordinators at the schools.
Oh, nice.
I mean, that's thrilling, because then there's funding coming right into the district, and it's earmarked for that position, which gets at what you were saying. What if every school could just have a garden coordinator?
Right, exactly. So is your Leadership Institute that you've got coming up in December addressing this? And tell us what that is.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. So we partnered with the Whole Kids Foundation. And,
great.
We're thrilled that they liked this idea enough to support it.
They're not going to like this great idea. Go ahead.
And the idea basically, we teach workshops all across the country. So originally we kind of came to them and said, well, what if you fund us to go to these different regions and teach our workshop across the country? And they said, that could be great, and we're interested, but is that really definitely what you want? And then, which was a great question. And I took a step back, and we took a step back as a team at Life Lab and realized, what we think would be even more powerful, what if we could bring the leaders from all of the regions here, and we could both do a training on leading professional development for educators, because that's what that's our strong suit at Life Lab, is leading great teacher workshops.
Yep.
But then we could do some train the trainers on that, but also then all of these groups would be in the room together, and they could share their resources on, how are you funding the school parts across your region, and how do you do, for example, assessment, impact assessment. Like, there's every different organizations trying to figure out, how do we do an evaluation of our programs and report the impacts on our students, and we could share all of our best practices and what about building and maintaining multiple school gardens? What systems have you developed for this? And so that's what we're going to do in December here in Santa Cruz. We're going to host we hope it's the first annual, it's definitely the first, we hope it's annual, School Garden Support Organization Institute. And it's going to be a 5-day institute, and their travel and lodging is all funded, paid for.
Oh my gosh.
And so we actually, it was an open application. We had 75 organizations apply for just 10 spots.
Oh my gosh.
It was a very difficult selection process, but we've got teams of 2 from each of 10 kind of fledgling or newer organizations that have been around for doing this work for fewer than 7 years. And then we also invited in 7 kind of all-star experts who have been doing this work for many, many years, most of them 15 or more years. And so all of us together, there are going to be 27 of us all together. And we're basically going to kind of do a train the trainers on educator workshops, but then also do a lot of kind of whole group and working group sessions where we're sharing questions and best practices around these key issues that come up for all of us, like sustainability and funding and assessment, et cetera. And our goals are twofold. One is that everyone who comes to the Institute can get resources and ideas from each other to improve their practice. But the other is that we can create some resources together, kind of capitalize on the brain power in that room to create some resources that we can share back out to a national audience.
I was going to say, you're going to document this really well and share it, right?
That's exactly what we want to do. And then we can promote it, through the National School Garden Network. That's a real online network for these school garden support organizations. And then we can share back out to, for example, all the people who applied but couldn't come this time, plus anyone else who's interested in it, a really kind of nice, clean, succinct documentation of some great best practices for, for garden-based education.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Good work.
Thank you. We're excited about it.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you learned from it.
Great. I think the time that I failed, this really kind of connects to the vision for this institute, and the reason that I'm so committed to this idea of school garden support organizations was when I was a teacher at Pescadero Middle School, I did not understand or anticipate the amount of work that would be required for my school garden. And I got really jazzed about kind of the install, and I got tons of community support for the installation. And I had it was a rural community. I had all these great farmers coming out to help, prepare and amend the soil. And I had all these great families help build the fence and build the beds. And I will say one really neat thing about that is it was a lot of times it was families who were less involved in other volunteer opportunities at the school. You often see like the same 3 or 4 moms and dads who are coming in once a week to grade papers. And it was like a whole different set of families would come in when I said, I need help building a compost bin or putting up a fence. And so that was great. But once that garden was built, it was just such a huge lift to maintain it and to keep it growing. And I really didn't anticipate that. And so what ended up happening is I would honestly say that many of my very best lessons, the most engaging, exciting lessons happened out in that garden. But they were few and far between because in between the weeds would grow up to my shoulders and I would get out there and go, I'm just totally overwhelmed by this. And
exactly.
I don't know what to do about it. And I think I'm going to go back in my classroom and pull out, that kit and do that thing that's already pre-planned and prepped. And so that gave me pause, to really understand. And then when I came to Life Lab, I really had to keep grappling with that question because I did not want to be in the position of training teachers to do something that I knew in my heart of hearts, this is impossible, don't do it. And that's why it's been so important to me to train them. Not only these are great lessons to do out in the garden and, here's how you can present it to kids, but also, and here are the systems that can support you in doing this so that you're not going to kill yourself trying to make this garden stay alive while you're also teaching full time and prepping and grading and all the rest. Yeah.
So maybe start small?
I would say start small and make a plan from the beginning. Kind of take into account, if we install this garden, what's it going to require each week and who's going to do that? And kind of have that plan and have those open eyes going in. And like we've talked about already, there are a lot of solutions, but it's a matter of recognizing that you're going to have that problem to solve.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you consider your biggest success?
Let's see. I feel, this is going to be kind of a little bit vague, but I feel like I mentioned that I think what Life Lab does really well is our teacher trainings, our professional development, our workshops, and then our curriculum. I think they're both really strong. And where I feel like we've had the most success is in both in how we implement those here in our garden classroom and also in training other teachers. How do I say this? I feel like the impact that I've seen that moves me the most is the social and emotional growth that is happening in the kids. And that's what I mentioned to you. The story about Marco is a great example of that. But, I think I could best explain this through an example. We work with a school called Amesti in Watsonville, which is just south of Santa Cruz here in California. And a teacher there named Margaret Rosa has described the effect that the school garden that we helped install at Amesti, the effect that it's had on her kids. And she said, of course, it's a great outdoor classroom and it's made science so much more fun and nutrition is so engaging. And she said, but beyond all of that, when the kids go out to that garden, they know that they are loved, that somebody loves them because they know this took a lot of work and somebody did that work for us, and
wow.
And I absolutely believe that. And I see that, in the kids, in how they interact with their garden coordinator there, and Margaret has described kids who specifically have grown up with a lot of trauma in their lives.
Yes.
And the garden becomes a place of refuge for them and a safe space for them and a place where they can not be the bad kid, but actually be the helper who's taking care of watering the plants well. And so when you ask about success, I think there's the academic and the changing eating habits, et cetera. But the part that gets me the most, that really kind of pulls on my heart and that I really believe is so important, is almost immeasurable, but it's that love factor and that impact on the kids, on their social and emotional well-being that I see happen.
It's when Marco opens up.
Yep.
Wow. What drives you?
Well, that.
Yeah.
What I just described to you is really what drives me personally. And I see people in this movement who are driven, by all sorts of things. And I totally respect that, like we're changing kids' diets. And for me, what really drives me the most is letting kids know that we think they're worth it and that they deserve this, that they deserve to have a natural space to call their own and where they can feel part of a web of life, that they deserve to have healthy food and to have the positive experiences with those healthy foods. They deserve good, engaging science lessons that really, are enlivening and exciting. Yeah. And I think that's what motivates me, is letting kids know that they're valuable and that they deserve the best.
Wow. So I'm all about education, and I have to know, is there one book that has been influential for you in this process?
Can I give you two? Sure. Great.
We get a bonus book today.
An early on option written, I think, in the 1970s or earlier is The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And that is the book that actually got me excited to become involved in education way back when I first was getting into outdoor ed, et cetera. And I love that book because it really speaks to the potential of, it's not about exactly what we teach, but how we teach. And it speaks to the potential of educators kind of to provide, like, what's the hidden curriculum and what can we teach people and what can they teach us just by how we're engaging in teaching. And there's a lot of revolutionary potential in there. Yeah. So I love that one.
What was the name of the book again?
It's called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah. And then a more recent book is called How Children Succeed by Paul Tough. And I love this book. There's two books by him that are on the same topic, but basically I think the first is Why Children Succeed, and then the second is How Children Succeed. And that's kind of what I was just talking about the social and emotional learning that happens. It's about all of the factors besides the content that impact how well a kid might do in school. Yeah. So it's things like resilience or grit or optimism and how important these factors are, and then kind of what are the factors, why they're so important, and then how can we foster those in and out of the school system? What can we do to proactively help children develop things like resilience and grit? And I think it's just fascinating and beautiful book.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah. What one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, I would say something we say a lot in our Life Lab workshops, which is dream big and start small. And if you're starting a school garden, that's my piece of advice, would be dream real big. All the things your kids are going to experience out there and all the amazing things you're going to grow, et cetera, but start small, because honestly, those kids will get so much out of one tiny little bed with a couple of plants growing in it. It all starts there. And then once your school has had that taste of success, you can keep expanding without kind of burning out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, Whitney. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
Oh, absolutely. The pleasure has been all mine. Thank you so much, Greg.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners get a hold of you and Life Lab?
Yeah, so Life Lab is on the web. We're at lifelab.org, and we're connected right there. If you go to lifelab.org/join, you can see how to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. to your heart's content.
Perfect.
And I'm on email at education@lifelab.org.
Perfect. Thank you. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast.
Thank you.
Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.